Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. As we just talked some general Week 3 takeaways, I want to dive into a few teams in particular, specifically looking at the teams that remain undefeated through 3 games. Now, I consider doing this as a contenders or pretenders segment, but the reality is I don't, at least personally, feel like my opinion has drastically changed on any of these teams, and I feel like just trying to group them into 2 specific subsets like that would be kind of taking away from the actual analysis of, even if I don't think that some of the 3-0 teams are Super Bowl contenders based off of these 3 games, it doesn't mean that what they have done up to this point isn't massively impressive. So I wanted to sort of just take the time to look team by team here and talk about whether or not these are sustainable results. Now, the Chiefs and the Bills are obviously the group of the true Super Bowl contenders. And the Bills are an interesting situation because there were a lot of people who were expecting them to fall off this season. We've talked about it at length, all of the turnover from last season to this season. And I was somebody who picked the Bills to win the division once again. That being said, though, I did not anticipate this level of dominance early on. Now, they haven't been exactly tested all that much yet, but I think that you can sort of flip that either way, because I still think that the Cardinals can easily be a playoff team this season, and the Bills were able to sort of stymie Arizona's offense in the second half of that Week 1 matchup to come back into that game. Week 2 was against the Dolphins, where yes, Tua goes out, but the Bills were dominating through 3 quarters up until that injury anyways. And then you look at this past game, I understand the Jaguars are a mess right now, but that's not to say they aren't without talent. And Josh Allen is playing at an MVP level. I think he pulled up to the front of the MVP race with that game. And ultimately, either way, dominating 47-10 of a team that had playoff expectations coming into the season, I have to give you some credit for that. Because if you can win convincingly, that is, to at least some degree, a good win. Now, so that's the Bills there. I do consider them in that Super Bowl contender tier. The Chiefs I do as well. And we're going to be talking about the Chiefs probably until February, so I don't want to go too heavily deep into the Chiefs here. There are people who are making the argument, well, if it weren't for some, ticky-tack calls at the end, that the Chiefs could be 1-2, or if Isaiah Likely's foot isn't on the line, that the Chiefs could have lost every single game, which is true. But the reality of the situation is, one way or another, the Chiefs have come out on top of each of these last 3 matchups. And I think that, yeah, you can play the hypothetical game and say, well, things broke a certain way to allow the Chiefs to be 3-0, sure. But, what sport has no luck involved whatsoever? Whether it be injuries or refs or just, a play falling through, that's just life. Nothing is ever, in a perfect simulation where everything goes 100% as it should. So the Chiefs are 3-0. I was really impressed with the fact that we saw no drop-off from, seeing Isaiah Pacheco go out with his fibula injury and having Carson Steele step in and basically play the exact same Isaiah Pacheco role. Now, I think that they are definitely better off with Pacheco. There's a lot more of a known substance there, and I'm just a big Isaiah Pacheco fan as well, so I'm hoping that he comes back. We aren't 100% guaranteed that he is going to be able to play this season, so we'll definitely be keeping our eyes on that. But ultimately, the Chiefs deserve to be in this position right now because, let's just face it, they have the best quarterback in the NFL. I know he hasn't played up to those standards yet, which is another part of those things. If you want to play the hypotheticals, well, what happens when Patrick Mahomes starts looking like Patrick Mahomes again? So I have a hard time dinging them for being 3-0. Now, as for the rest of the group, because the Steelers, Seahawks, and Vikings being in this category with the Chiefs and the Bills would have sounded very far-fetched coming into the year. Now, I think that ultimately I feel like looking at this type of a situation, my opinions haven't changed a ton necessarily in terms of how competitive can they be in a true playoff push setting. The Seahawks and the Steelers are the two teams that I thought that they would be, fringe playoff contenders, would be in the hunt for the entire season anyways. And they have both taken advantage of what's been pretty soft competition out of the gates. Starting with the Steelers, because that is, one of the more topical teams. The Steelers won on the road against Atlanta, which is a very good win there, just for the sake of, it's a very solid win because it's on the road. It is in a hostile environment in front of a fan base that was extremely fired up for this upcoming season. We still don't know if the Falcons are that good, but I'm still going to give them credit for going on the road and pulling a game out like that. They also won without scoring a touchdown, though. And that does sort of bring me into my larger concern with the Steelers, is that Justin Fields has looked very competent as the starting quarterback of that franchise. I think that he should be the starting quarterback moving forward here this season, but they are still yet to score 20 points, which isn't a super sustainable way to play undefeated football. Now, some counter arguments to that point that I just made. Last season, they averaged just 17.8 points per game, which was 28th in the NFL, and they still made the playoffs there. They are currently averaging 17 flat, but I think that their offense should continue to get better the more that this coaching staff trusts Justin Fields, that they are sort of working his way into this season, and I think there's a lot of positives there, and I undoubtedly think that he can be a better quarterback option than anything they had last year with Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph. They have a clear upgrade at offensive coordinator, in my opinion. I know a lot of people are not in on Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator. He was clearly in over his head as a head coach in Atlanta, but I think he's done a significantly better job this season, and just trying to prioritize that running game, get Justin Fields in favorable situations, keep him ahead of the sticks as much as possible, which is something that they were unable to do in week 1 against the Falcons, but feel like they've been a lot better with since then. And I think that ultimately, I broke down this specifically earlier in the week. Thought we saw the training wheels come off a little bit up for Justin Fields this past weekend. 11 throws in or around the hash marks in the middle of the field this past game. That is almost double from his total through the first 2 games combined, where he threw 0 passes in the middle of the field of week 1. And it was 6 in week 2. So we're seeing him get more acclimated to this offense. And, I think that it's really good. And I'm very happy for Justin Fields, who seems to be, even though it is just still a 3-game sample size, in an organization that is properly developing him after, obviously, the dysfunctional years in Chicago. Now, that also being said, even if the offense doesn't continue to go step by step each game and improve from there, and they are still mediocre to slightly below average, this is a defense that can more than make up for it. That's why they made the playoffs last year, despite being one of the worst teams in scoring points per game. And I think that there is a lot of upside for this Steelers team, but this idea of putting them as a Super Bowl contender, I have to see more from the offense before getting there. The Steelers are still bottom of the league in points per game. They are just 2 for 8 in the red zone up to this point, which from a percentage standpoint is tied for last in the league with the Dolphins. A little arbitrary using the percentage stat so early in the season, but you get my point. The Steelers are going to need to continue to improve. As for the Seahawks, I think that this is a situation where they also just need to actually prove themselves against a more solidified team, where they have beaten a rookie quarterback in his first game of his first ever NFL game in Bo Nix and the Broncos week 1. They beat the Patriots with a bridge quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. We saw a little bit more of who the Patriots actually are this past weekend when they got demolished by the Jets. It took the Seahawks overtime to knock off the Pats. And then this past week, they beat up on a Dolphins team that was starting a backup quarterback, and even the backup quarterback ended up getting hurt at one point. I believe that was in the third quarter as well. So, I'm not trying to put down their wins by any means, but it's hard for me to sort of overlook who I kind of thought they were headed into the season based off of, these 3 games. Now, I'll give credit a ton to Geno Smith and Mike McDonald as well, but Geno Smith especially, somebody who I thought regressed from his play in 2022, and I was maybe slightly concerned coming into this year that it could have been a little bit of a one-hit wonder for Geno in Seattle, and ultimately he's looked excellent up to this point in the year through 3 games. So, give him credit, give Mike McDonald credit for almost immediately turning around that defense. Like I mentioned, not a very high level of competition up to this point, but allowing just 14.3 points per game through 3 games. That is something that is going to be, tested a little bit more. I think that personnel-wise, Seahawks have some playmakers, but we're still sort of waiting to see them shut down an actual elite offense. Next week, they have the Detroit Lions. Run defense has been one of the biggest struggles with the Seahawks these past couple years, and you have one of the best offensive lines and one of the best, if not the best, running back duo in the backfield there. So that will be a significant test. I'm not saying the Seahawks need to win that game. They need to show that they can hang around with these legitimate Super Bowl contenders as well, though, before I put them into that conversation. And then I want to finish off here with the Minnesota Vikings, where I didn't have the Vikings in the playoff hunt coming into this season, so it's not like, I wasn't right on the Vikings necessarily, but I am definitely not shocked by the hot start to the season, considering the fact that I have always highly regarded Kevin O'Connell as one of the up-and-coming coaches in the NFL, and I think that he's done an excellent job. I'm also a believer in Brian Flores as a defensive coordinator. Gets a bad rap because of everything that went down in Miami towards the end there, but he knows his football, and he now gets all of these new pieces on the defensive side of the ball. This is a well-constructed team. And I think that I myself, too, overreacted to the idea that J.J. McCarthy tore his ACL, that he was, I really didn't ever think it was going to be that much of a drop-off, week 1 from him and Sam Darnold, that they were pretty even-keeled. I just thought that Sam Darnold had a much lower ceiling than he is seeming to have right now, and you got to feel great for him as well. But again, I'm not sitting here like, how in the world is this possible? The Vikings have a good roster overall, and I think that they have a great infrastructure as well from a coaching perspective that I think it's incredible to see up to this point. You go out, you beat a 49ers team. Sure, they're without some key players, but a win's a win. That is still a tough game. And then you do the same against the Texans, who are also one of the best teams in the other conference. So I think that this is a situation where ultimately, the Vikings, this is just about building up what the future and what the vision of this organization looks like moving forward, but very encouraging overall. And again, as for the Steelers, Seahawks, Vikings, I'm not throwing them in Super Bowl contender tiers just yet, but they are definitely off to incredible starts and should seemingly be in the playoff hunt through the remainder of the season, which if you ask any of those fan bases coming into the year, I feel like most will be satisfied with that. Maybe the Steelers are a little bit hungrier for a playoff win and are sick of just playoff appearances, but either way, could not really draw much of a better start than winning your first 3 games. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section on whether or not any of these undefeated teams continue to be legit. But we are now going to be diving into some of the quarterback play from the young guys from this past weekend, where we are going to be running through and grading each of the day 1, day 2 picks of the 2023 and 24 draft classes based off of their play in week 3. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.